In the far-flung future of the 41st century, humanity is dealing with several problems on our doorstep. Our species is essentially beleaguered by continual wars with orcs, claimed elves, and now biomass-consuming monstrosities. As humanity has entered this era of existence, our race has extended deep into the galaxy and held many planets, with our colonies being established for various reasons, whether it be a mining planet, farming planet, or just another world to deny the enemy, that being anything that's a xeno and not a human. Our race would dominate large swaths of the galaxy, but even to that point, control became fleeting. As confrontation after confrontation would break out, it's unsurprising that humanity would be knocked back on its heels for the most part, which is what it sorely did not need. And what it also didn't need would come in the form of another invasion by a species that is known to wipe galaxies clean of biodiversity. As the species entered the Milky Way galaxy, once more from a different direction this time, it highlights the absolutely extensive threat they pose to not just humans, but everything contained within our galaxy. Starting fairly quiet enough, within the Residuous system, which is a part of the Segmentum Pacificus. I know the names, right? Just know it's a solar system in another part of the galaxy. One world in particular would be hit, kicking off the Fourth War with the Tyrannids. Kadaku would have a few meteorites fall from its sky and then strike the planet, disrupting the otherwise calm existence of this jungle world. Now, arguably, if you've seen my first video going over the overall breakdown of the Tyrannids, you know very likely there were already gene stealers on the planet prior to anything concerning an invasion fleet. But if you haven't seen that, I would suggest watching it, as it does outline some fairly important strategy concerning the Tyrannid fleets, where they came from, and why they're absolutely such a massive issue, and potentially, there could be entire galaxies that may or may not have been taken over yet. But concerning Kadaku, this particular planet is totally boned. As the fight would break out all over the planet pretty much all at once, the Tyrannids had arrived from what is called kind of a Leviathan hive fleet, which is considered to be one of the largest. Now, to make this video make a little more sense concerning the stakes, there are many different hive fleets that have attacked the Milky Way galaxy and from different directions. And this highlights, given the vast distances of those attacks, that this species is not just jumping around on the outside of the galaxy and picking a different axis to hit, I guess the best way to put it. Instead, they just happen to arrive from that actual direction, meaning that the hive fleet, to be as large as it is, or at least the overall fleet, they must have come from somewhere else and then absorbed a ton of biomass to become what they are. So if this is the case, very likely other galaxies have fallen, or at minimum other races out there in other areas of the universe have just been completely absorbed. After their own decimation, the Tyranids then get this biomass and return back to the thorn in their side, the Milky Way galaxy. Of course, once again, given that they are approaching from a completely different side this time, this is not the same hive fleet every single time, but instead it is actually a different successful, or at least formerly successful, invasion fleet from somewhere else that has been drawn to the galaxy. Given it is the Fourth War, they have been repelled 3 times prior, but it now appears that they are back for a fourth and much larger attacking force than they were at any other point, requiring humanity to not only attempt to grasp at the size of this threat, but also deal with what is coming down the pipeline. So the reality is, Kadaku is only the beginning of what could be a cleansing of the entire galaxy if the threat is not halted here, or at minimum shortly after. Understanding the threat somewhat, Ultramarines would be dispatched to the planet after receiving distress calls from the planet's defensive forces, but upon coming into contact with the planet's atmosphere, the invasion has already kicked off in its full capacity, and your team is quickly brought down one by one until you yourself have to essentially be revived, only saved by the timing of others and the extra organs and survivability of the Ultramarine in the first place, which I have actually done a video covering that. Essentially their biology and physiology, and also the extra organs, how part of their brain shuts down so they can sleep, all those good things. So as the battle for Kadaku progresses, it becomes even more clear that this problem has spread beyond just the confines of this world, as you are also dispatched to 2 other planets, such as the Demirium planet, which is known as a burial world, where a particular project known as Project Aurora is based. However, this project has more to do with the Necrons and their technology being combined with human technology to banish chaos all over the galaxy, which is ideal, but in this case, it's not necessary to discuss it. If you would like a video over that, let me know. But back to the Tyranids. As the Tyranids are just absolutely slaughtering humanity in its regular human form, this is not to say that humans actually haven't been stacking their own bodies, or at least the Tyrannid bodies, but the problem is how the Tyranids actually operate. This species, first and foremost, again, is a hive mind, and due to this fact, they do not think individually and they fear nothing. And believe it or not, this is related to today's topic, so don't click off. Their only goal is to attack, acquire biomass, and get out before they can be planet cracked, essentially. So as a result, any human that drops becomes biomass, but also any Tyranid that drops becomes biomass too. This material can be used to further create more of their numbers used in the attack, as a cleanup crew is then sent in to consume everything and then sucked back up towards the hive ship. If the process were to take place with only a large hive mind attacking force, this may in turn be quite easy to overcome. Largely, the attack would focus on those key points that control standard warriors and foot soldiers of the Tyranid forces. Essentially, these are known as hive tyrants, which there will be a video on them in the future, but they control the area around them and any foot soldiers located within their field of influence. Taking them out simply reduces a Tyranid force to a group of animals driven only by instinct rather than a formidable fighting force. However, to counter this glaring vulnerability, the Tyranids have adapted over time. Their entire, I suppose, method, you could call it, requires them to lose just as much as it requires them to win for them to adapt. By winning, they gain more biomass to be converted, which makes their forces stronger overall. By losing, however, they gain valuable insight into what those failings were, which born out of that are new forms with different abilities to counter the enemy. It is undeniable that humanity, while still very much so mortal, is quite adaptive in their responses to enemies that could be attacking, able to think on our feet and shift the course of the battle. It is our non-rigidity in dealing with problems that has allowed for our species to contend with the other threats surrounding our section of space. But remember, this is the Fourth Tyrannid War, and because they have lost so many times prior, they have become stronger, and along with that, dealing with other conquered species of whatever worlds were absorbed, it is very likely they have come across some fairly crafty species over there too. Out of the ashes of defeat, new forms would rise whose whole purpose was to operate independently of the hive, at least to a degree, and lead them towards hidden, entrenched humans and really any other species that may be holding out from a Tyranid invasion. Which, finally, this brings us around to today's topic after, that's not really a massive intro, but it was more like a crash course. It's basically just catching up considering it's been a hot minute. But to contend with humanity and its ability to adapt, you need to strike at the source of that ability, that obviously being our brains. Our brains contain all the information the invading force would ever need to varying degrees. Like the low-level infantry know where the caches are.
What did he say?
And actually, that's an
Cache.
Shut up, man!
They know where other soldiers are, what their fortifications look like, and where they may or may not be, at least as far as what their unit is planning or where they plan on heading. The higher up you go, individuals may know about plans to carpet bomb the entire planet, where the fallback points are, or worse, where Earth may even be located down to the literal coordinates. All of these things can be gleaned if you're just able to understand the human mind, which interrogation could be used, but Tyranids are not interested in such pleasantries. What is way easier to do is just suck out your brains and understand the information contained within. But to do so, you would need a force that could go out and strike the species before they even know that you're in the area. And for this, you functionally need something that is going to be a scout. This is where the Lictor comes into play. The Lictor is a terrifying creature for several reasons. First and foremost, the average human currently stands at around 5'8" to 5'10", depending on location. This is around 172 to 177.8 centimeters in heathen units. If you stack a regular human against a Tyranid warrior, for instance, which is said to be the same height as a Lictor, this puts them at around 8 feet tall, around 243.8 centimeters, and unfortunately for humanity, we are still animals ourselves and very much so prone to looking at a creature that height and feeling a bit uneasy, which has a swath of cascading consequences for our ability to fight. The Lictor also is said to weigh somewhere around 1 metric ton or around 2,200 pounds. And this makes this creature extremely capable of smacking into light armor and completely knocking it down, and this includes ultramarines. Considered to be a vanguard organism, this has allowed it to ascertain several abilities that standard Tyranids just do not possess. Sent out prior to the invading force, they will enter an area, and due to their active camouflage ability, it makes them incredibly difficult to see. The reality is they will just remain hidden, completely immobile for several days, all while humanity in this case may be passing under the branch that it's currently residing on. Here and there, it may grab the lone human that looks important, where it engages in a process to learn what the species is actually doing, but we will discuss that a little later. As it sits, watching completely unseen. The invasion force will be sent in behind it. Because it has been in this area for so long, and as long as it has, and many others like it in different areas, it will have seen target value of the location. And depending on how valuable it is, it will release a hormone signature that also signals this higher value, and the higher the value, the more irresistible it is to the horde behind it. So as it draws in the other Tyrannids, it may even move deeper into the area to find more targets, grab more humans, or destroy a few bands of soldiers, and then just to move into the jungle once more as its tracks fade.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture.
This has several psychological effects on a defending force. First, let's say you're just like hanging out with your longtime friend, right? Your guard is down as the fighting is taking place on a completely separate part of the world, and you are in a heavily fortified area. As you talk to him, all of a sudden the entire top half of his body slides off the bottom half of his body, and he's just gone. You turn to look to see what even did that, it's just the bushes move, and then that's it. You yell to everyone else as the guy you just looked at, who was like you're yelling to, now falls apart before your eyes. You swear you saw a smudge in your vision near him, but did you really? You begin hearing yelling all over as gunfire is quickly silenced by something that's very clearly near you, but you cannot see it at all. Then you feel white-hot pain through your chest region as your body goes numb. The next thing you know, you're looking at the lower half of your body as everything goes black. This is the Lictor's attack method. As the creature is mostly invisible to the naked eye because, I mean, it's punk mode, like, get good, sight by light, you know what I'm saying? Or light by sight, whatever it is, sight by light. Anyways, the point is, it's invisible to the naked eye, and unless it wants to be seen, this is going to absolutely terrifying humans because it never really wants to be seen. Our eyes are just not built to see this creature, and its quick movements make it almost impossible to react to. As it does come into view occasionally, when it does finally reveal itself, it would be absolutely terrifying. Again, we know the creature is over 8 feet tall, meaning it absolutely towers over your average guardsmen and may even be taller than some ultramarines, if not the same height as them. So it's pretty much their equal. The weight it can throw around is absolutely massive to boot. But now that we actually see the creature, let's talk about its physiology before moving into what makes these creatures a massive concern. Starting with the feet, we see this creature walks on what could be considered the balls of its feet. I guess really just the toes if it had them. They have 2 large toes, kind of like a hoof-like appendage on the foot. And really, these are just its claws, because then we can see 2 other dew claws, so to speak, on either side of the foot. Their leg continues up in a digitigrated structure, much like the rest of its species, and has a thick carapace serving as a natural battle armor to protect the muscles. On the legs exists these several carapace protrusions that are very likely sharp barbs. If they were to kick at an unarmed human, or unarmored human, I guess is the best way to put it, they would easily tear flesh and muscle away from bone on the recoil back. As we move up to the thigh region, dense carapace covers the front of the quadricep region, and on the backside, it's relatively free of armoring, allowing for quick movements without the armor getting in the way. Moving up to the abdominal region, we can see that there are bony it's carapace coverings. It's still the same material as on the legs, but it's more segmented in a way that will still allow for the Lictor to crouch and move quickly because of the nature of its job. Then as we go up to the thoracic region, the chest is quite large as it serves to allow for the attaching arms to be securely anchored to the body. The first 2 arms are very much like the arms of humanity or any other Tyrannid. The shoulder joints attach standardly at the top of the rib cage, continuing down into the bicep and tricep region with a long forearm and hands tipped with massive claws formed out of this carapace. Due to the arm's length, when slashing, this works almost like the technology humanity used to use, which is known as an atlatl to throw spears. This turns smaller movements of the shoulder into much more powerful swipes, or at least with the atlatl, into throws. But in the case of the Tyrannids, because the forearm is longer, basically it works as an atlatl. I mean, it adds more force. And this can inflict massive damage onto anything it uses it against, but as long as the arms are still attached, they can also grasp onto other species as well. In fact, that's kind of what they do. They hang out in trees and then wait for something to go underfoot, and they'll just snatch you up. And that's it. You're gonna get poked in the eyes. So a secondary set of arms, so to speak, sits on the upper back region just behind the shoulders. These are used predominantly as scythes, operating similar to a praying mantis arm that can curl back in on themselves, keeping them away from being in the way. But when utilized, they can swipe with tremendous force, piercing the armor quite easily of even ultramarines, ending them in the process. These mantis arms are tipped with several carapace protrusions that are razor sharp and inflict puncture damage to anything. So F's in the chat for any infantrymen that gets too close fighting this thing. Armoring exists all over the back of this creature, with it coming to a point just behind the head. Now, the one that I took out ended up losing its head, so we'll have to probably switch to another image, but this thick carapace allows for, regular small arms to be completely deflected while guardsmen laser guns can inflict damage. But the question becomes, can you inflict enough in the time needed to put this thing down before it gets you? And typically the answer is no, as in the time it takes for you to react, which is standardly in humans around 250 milliseconds to even know something is happening, then maybe the second it takes you to raise your counter method, and then the half second it takes you to fire at it, the Lictor is gone out of sight before you even had a chance, and you're probably already dead. Its entire physical form is built to get in and get out before anyone has a chance to counter it, but arguably the most horrifying portion of this creature, which again, I lost, is its face. The Lictor exists to extract information first and foremost, and to do so, it needs to know what the enemy is doing. And those that get captured by this creature, you will basically come face to face with what is a mini Cthulhu. The head appears actually somewhat like an octopus body. Feeder tendrils hang down from its mouth location that run back into what could be considered a fairly bulbous head because it needs more brains than normal, considering it has to be out on its own. On the other side of its head exists two smaller mandibles that can actually pierce through the human skull and eyes quite easily, as they exist for this exact reason. In fact, when you find the two dead Ultramarines before you encounter the Lictor, they had holes punched through their helmet by these mandibles. So as a person is captured, the Lictor will actually grab their entire body, dead or alive, doesn't really matter, and then take it away to another location. Once there, the mandibles will be used to crack into the skull, completely lobotomizing the target. From here, the feeder tendrils are used to suck out the brain of the person, and with it, valuable information. See, the thing to remember about the human brain is knowledge, memories, and understanding. I mean, everything is contained within the very physical structures of our brain itself. Episodic memories, or autobiographical ones, as they are known, are formed within the hippocampus structure of the brain, and this is located within the brain's temporal lobe. But this is where they are just formed. The details of said memory are then solidified within the prefrontal cortex of the human brain. The hippocampus is used to retrieve these memories, but all in all, they are located right at the front of your skull. Now, it should be known that these are episodic memories, things like, for instance, what you're going to need to remember, such as ammo caches, where those are hidden, what trench was dug for the oncoming Tyrannid invasion, what traps are laid so that you don't step into them, so the Lictor now doesn't step into them, that sort of thing. That's really for your own information, but other parts of your brain also still store memories. Things like emotional memories are ones, and anything traumatic is actually stored in the amygdala. When the Lictor attacks and drags you away, it cracks through the front part of your skull, sucking out your prefrontal cortex first, and once this happens, it basically means lights out almost immediately anyhow, so you really don't have to worry about much from here. Large chunks would remain intact, however, as they would enter the digestive system of the Lictor. However, you are not just used for sustenance. It's important to remember that since the Lictor is sent out ahead of the hive mind, it is independent and must operate at an increased capacity compared to the other Tyrannids. As a result, specialized structures internal to specifically just it have formed. Interestingly, these structures, to a degree, are not so different from humanity. Take our gut brain, so to speak, within just your abdominal area in order to coordinate all the movements of your smooth muscle and the digestive processes, you have somewhere between 100 to 500 million neurons. This forms the enteric nervous system. By comparison, a cat has on average around 250 million neurons in their brain. So on the upper end, you have 2 cat brains worth of neurons coordinating your intestinal movement. Which also, interestingly, it is said depression may be prevalent today because of what we are eating to a degree that is, it's depressing your enteric nervous system, which has consequences on our brains and their functioning. Kind of an interesting tidbit for you. It is known that also that if you cut the vagus nerve, this can actually have mental impacts when that is the nerve that runs from your brain to your intestines. And if you stimulate that nerve, it can treat conditions like epilepsy, depression, and inflammatory disorders. Basically, your brain and your abdominal region need to communicate in order to function appropriately. Anyhow, so if you look at a Lictor through the same lens, we can begin to see what it has internally for itself, that it can basically read your brain even if it's in chunks. For it to interact with the human brain chunks, it's clear a homegrown classic in its own race, that being the hive mind abilities, are very much so displayed here. Much like how a hive tyrant can control other Tyrannids, so too can a Lictor use the same internal ability it has to force fire the neurons of the human brain chunks. And this may work by the physical contact between the side of the stomach of the Lictor coming into contact with the human brain chunks. Oxygen is likely added to any type of fluid that may be in there, and it's also likely a salty matrix as well that's flooding the stomach. Electrical impulses are then fired, which may be similar to a hippocampus trying to retrieve information. These memories are fired, which, don't get me wrong, a lot of them are going to be fragmented due to the physical destruction of the brain, but this information carries on to the Lictor's nervous system that is then reported by the enteric nervous system to its own brain. From here, it can deduce what is around it based on what the human has seen or heard. And once all the information it has needed is then gleaned away, the brain soup is likely just digested for sustenance, given that it is so far away from the hive. From here, depending on how useful that information is, this will either cause them to naturally produce more of these pheromones that attract the hive towards them to varying degrees, and if nothing is really going on, then the Lictor continues moving to another area further ahead of the front to potentially find more information. However, just because the creature can go invisible does not mean it is... Which, before moving on, let's talk about its camouflage for a moment. This camo appears to be natural, not artificial. As a result, it appears as though it can actively change its coloring of its carapace. Now, this goes beyond what we have seen with animals on Earth. However, this process is likely the same, just increased in visual sharpness considerably. It is highly likely that the Lictors are created from a species they absorbed that have the ability to camouflage, meaning they have specialized cells on their surface known as chromatophores. Chromatophores contain specialized packets of melanin that come in varying colors. These cells are directly connected to the nervous system, so based on what the Lictor sees is how it can change its color. It does so without thinking about it, and it's likely to be an autonomic process, meaning that it happens without thinking about it. Sort of like breathing, for instance, is autonomic. However, right now you're manually breathing. Sorry about that. So during an attack, it appears the movement of the Lictor causes its color to kind of go back to default mode, making it visible for a short while. And during this attack is when it's most vulnerable. If you can draw a Lictor out to fight, A, you're probably gonna die, but 2, if you're an Ultramarine, you're only likely to die. By pissing these things off enough, they will descend to actively engage in combat where you can outright attack it. After all, it is still an animal, and if it bleeds, you can kill it.
He said it! He said it!
If an Ultramarine is quick enough and pays attention well enough, they may be able to get the upper hand on the Lictor and then take it out. But even Ultramarines do struggle to put these things down. And this is why the favorited method by the Imperium is to just learn if a Lictor is in the area. They will pick a several mile by mile range and just carpet bomb the ever-loving crap out of it to destroy the Lictor. The problem is this doesn't always work, and it's been shown to fail many times because they just hide in crevices and then survive only to terrorize soldiers once more because they can't really confirm their kill ever. So by killing one hand-to-hand, this is just as effective as with any other Tyrannid, but using its own scythes against it, putting it through its thoracic region or abdomen, it shows the creature is not any more effective at shirking death just because it's good at dealing it. It will bleed out, bringing its own storied career to a screeching halt. However, this is not the standard interaction. These creatures are incredibly difficult to put down due to their hit-and-run tactics and just their sheer size. So nukes are preferable if you ever find one in your area, but hopefully humanity's not ready to deal with that type of crap quite yet. Give us another 20,000 years, or maybe 40,000 years, maybe. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. I did a poll a few days ago, and I do believe we're going to structure the channel as such. Video games on Wednesdays, or possibly Thursdays, and then covering a movie on Saturday or Sundays. I feel like the channel was becoming too focused on movies, and while I love covering them, I have way more free creative expression when talking about video games, which is why I even got into YouTube in the first place. Anyhow, I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales, and Roanoke Games links where I will live stream. All that will be in the description. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astronauts, Army and Tristan Kessick. Thank you guys. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Death Dancer. Thanks, Prometheus. I'd also like to thank our scientists, Dakota23, Invictus Echo, Metric System, Official Texan Stutz, and the victorious return of Chad the Enjoyer of scientific explanations of B-grade horror movies. And the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's support as well. You're absolute ballers. All right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.